Welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show, where I help physical therapists learn how to get their clients out of pain and back to training in the gym. My name is Dan Pope, and I'll be your instructor. I'm a physical therapist, coach, and fellow meathead. I love training just as much as you do and want to help you get all of your patients out of pain and back to the gym where they belong. Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to the Fitness Pain-Free Show. Today we're going over what are the psychological risk factors for injuries in sports. It is an article review we're going over today by Martin et al., a psychological risk profile for overuse injuries in sport. Let's get going. So, first, before we get going, thank you so much for your support watching the Fitness Pain-Free Show. You allow me to do what I love for a living. My name is Dan Pope. I am a physical therapist, coach, personal trainer, and meathead. I love exercise. I love spreading this information. I am passionate about this, and you listening to me today allows me to fulfill what I love. This is the Fitness Pain-Free Show, where we help coaches and physical therapists like you get your patients out of pain and back to training. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please hit that like button, comment below, and subscribe to the channel. It helps me out greatly. And if you're listening to this as a podcast, please consider rating and reviewing this if you enjoy it. It really helps me out. So if you want to go that extra mile and support the channel even further, please consider subscribing to my premium membership, Fitness Pain-Free Insiders. It's a comprehensive educational resource and toolkit for the fitness and rehab professional. So I think Netflix, but for trainers and physical therapists. It's premium content from yours truly. I make all the content on there, and it's similar content to the show, but way more in depth. It's updated monthly. I've been updating this thing for the past 5 or so years, and there's a lot on there. There's 100 plus webinars, ebooks, and complete guides. You also have access to a private Facebook group to have all of your questions answered by me. You also get a chance to decide upcoming podcast topics. So if there's something you really want to learn more about, hear me go in depth about, let me know. I can do that. And you can get started for just $1 for a week-long trial. And after that, it's a recurring membership of $9.99. All right. You can cancel anytime. All right. I won't be upset if you do. And if you want to get started, all you need to do is head to fitnesspainfree.com, click on the programs link, and then click on the Fitness Pain-Free Insiders online library and get started. So, why? Why are we going over a study on psychosocial, psychological risk factors for injury, right? Typically, we go over things like biomechanics, training volumes, programming, that type of deal as it relates to pain. Well, in general, I think it's very important to understand risk factors for injury, despite some of these risk factors being kind of away from my traditional expertise as a physical therapist, right? Need to understand what factors are relevant to injury, right? So if my biomechanics are off, maybe that leads to an injury, but maybe my biomechanics are off for some other psychological reason we'll discuss a little bit later. And if I'm trying to fix those issues, then I probably have to get at that root cause, which may be the psychology of the athlete, right? And injuries are multifactorial. They're very complex. There are psychosocial influencers. There are all sorts of other influencers. You know, we went over exercise technique, total training volume, that type of deal, stress, recovery, sleep. All these things play into the equation, right? And what we're going to discuss today is that some of these psychosocial influencers are going to affect some of the biomechanical stressors. So certain psychological influencers may lead me to overuse my body in certain ways and cause a problem, right? So in order to come up with some sort of intervention to correct these issues, first we have to figure out which factors are actually relevant. And that's what this article is seeking to do, right? And then once we figure out which risk factors are going to be relevant to injury, can we eliminate or reduce these risk factors and improve risk of injury, right? Can we actually prevent some of these injuries? And can we return our athletes to their sports a little bit safer over the course of time after rehabilitation, right? So what was the study question here? Well, this study was trying to develop a psychological risk profile for overuse injuries. And basically what they're trying to figure out is what are those athletes that are more likely to kind of persevere through training despite being injured. Now, if I keep on working through a little bit of pain over the course of time, sometimes it gets worse until it's a full-blown injury that really keeps you from playing your sport, all right? We're trying to figure out what is that psychological risk profile. What are the athletes that are doing that? What are they thinking? What's kind of their psychology, right? And what they first went over are the previously studied potential psychological risk factors, right? And these are going to be stress or perceived stress, really. And there's quite a bit of research to show there's a strong correlation to injury and stress. And this could be life stress, it could be sport stress, it could be school stress. These are all stressors that are going to correlate with getting hurt, right? The other factor that's been studied over the course of time are certain elements of perfectionism, particularly perfectionistic concerns, which is a tendency to evaluate oneself critically, right? And these folks, because they have this perfectionistic concern, have an increased tendency to overtrain. And we'll talk about this a bit later, but I think a lot of these are double-edged swords. So if you're a perfectionist type person, you're going to outwork the person next to you. And I got to tell you, I mean, some of my idols growing up, guys like Dan Gable, talked about how often they worked and how they try to perfect things. And they were perfectionists in nature. And I think that's one of the reasons why they did so well. So, I mean, you may be more likely to get hurt and you may be more likely to succeed. I think it's that double-edged sword kind of analogy. So what else is going to correlate with injury? Having a high athletic identity. So I talk about this a lot. I'm very interested by this. Athletic identity is the degree to which a person identifies with the role of an athlete and looks to others for acknowledgement of that role. It's your sense of self is really wrapped up with being an athlete and a good athlete, right? And because of this, you may be more prone to persevere through injury and attempt to train and compete normally despite the first signs of overuse symptoms. And these folks tend to use denial as a maladaptive coping behavior. So, oh, my knee hurts. Oh, well, it doesn't hurt. Just keep going, right? And over the course of time, obviously, this can lead to problems. So a high athletic identity, again, we'll discuss this a bit later, but I think this is also a double-edged sword, right? So if you really identify with being a really strong athlete, you're going to try to keep on pushing that, because your sense of self, right, the way other people see you, the way you feel valued in this world is wrapped up in being a really good athlete. So of course you're going to try to uphold that. And when an injury gets in the way, you're going to do everything you can to not let that interfere, right? And sometimes that leads you to getting hurt further. And last one is the coach-athlete relationship. And a lack of communication with coaches leads to athletes underreporting pain. And this is, there's a lot more to unpack with this one right here. But basically, if you have a poor relationship with your coach, you probably aren't reporting pain. They don't understand what's going on, and they may end up causing you to push through pain, right? The other piece is that certain coaches, and it really depends on the coach you do have, is that they don't really accept pain. They don't like pain. They don't think pain is a good excuse for poor performance. So they may push you in a negative way to continue competing and training despite being hurt. Okay. So what are the methods in this study? They had a whole lot of athletes that they ended up trying to reach out to. 197 athletes had started the study, and then 149 of those athletes actually finished the entire study. So there was a minimum age of 16 for the study. They had 105 males and 44 females. The mean age was 27 years old. And these guys were pretty competitive. They were competitive at a regional to international level. They had to be an active competitive athlete, which means you have regular official competitions held by a national sport federation. They were individual and team sports, so you saw track and field, long distance running, triathlon, and weightlifting, which I thought this was awesome because I work with a lot of weightlifters, I work with a lot of long distance runners, a lot of triathletes, and this is right in my wheelhouse. It wasn't just talking about field sports, right, and court sports, but they included team sports, so basketball, rugby, football, volleyball, and handball. And these sports were all in France or Sweden. Now, how did they quantify the amount of stress and everything else? So the first thing they utilized was a stress questionnaire. It was called the Life Event Survey for Collegiate Athletes, or LESCA scale. And to be honest, I've never heard of this before, but honestly, it could be a pretty good questionnaire to utilize for me in the future. And it measures an athlete's history of life event stressors. There's a list of 69 life events, and the intensity of the stressors were measured on an 8-point scale ranging from -4, which is extremely negative, to +4, extremely positive. And what they did was they summed up the negative events, and they gave a summation score for that. To be honest, I would kind of like to see if the positive stressors would potentially outweigh some of the negative stressors if they decided to do that. In this study, they did not, just because in prior studies, the negative events were shown to be what was important, so they only looked at those. For perfectionism, they used a questionnaire called the Brief Frost Multidimensional Perfectionism Scale, which is 22 items measuring different dimensions of perfectionism. For athletic identity, they used the Athletic Identity Measurement Scale, 7 items on a 7-point scale. And for the coach/athlete relationship, they used the Coach-Athlete Relationship Questionnaire. And I got to be honest, I haven't used any of these questionnaires. I think that in the future, I probably should look into them a little bit more. It is a lot of paperwork to fill out. So if you're going to be using this from a practical perspective, honestly, I think it'd be a little challenging. But it's probably a good way to identify folks that have these risk factors and then come up with some sort of intervention strategy. What I will say is that for some of the ideas that they're finding, some of these risk factors they're finding, I think that I have been able to identify which athletes have some of these just by talking to them and seeing what their actions are, although it would be better to be a little objective, even though this is subjective survey information. The overuse injury was defined by the Oslo Sports Trauma Research Center's Overuse Injury Questionnaire, which is pretty good. They're trying to standardize overuse injuries, which is a big problem if you look at research on injuries. There's no standard that people use for injury. So this is their attempt to try to standardize injuries. And this overuse injury questionnaire is based on function, not time loss. So basically, you can grade injuries as either a time loss injury, so basically you hurt bad enough so you have to stop participation in your sport, or non-time loss injury, where you have an injury but you can continue to play because it's not bad enough. That's not really great for kind of calculating the severity of an injury. I think a good example is something like a shin splint. So when I was in college, I ran through shin splints for all of the years that I was an athlete. I thought it was normal, right? But shin splints can become more severe. They can turn into stress fractures. Athletes will run with stress fractures for months, right? And obviously this is not good for your bone's health, okay? And it could be a very severe injury, but you can kind of continue playing through it, right? So what they're trying to figure out is, are these overuse injuries occurring? And if you consider an injury only an injury if you have time loss, it's not picking up these overuse injuries that are probably in the background, but not being picked up because they're not bad enough to stop training, right? So this questionnaire calculates severity of injury, and basically they quantified anything over a 0 is considered an injury. So what this means is that there's going to be a huge variance of injury. There's going to be people that are absolutely dying out there, right, with a really bad injury, and there's folks out there with just very, very minor injuries as well. So take that with a grain of salt. They're picking up every single injury. Okay. So how long was this study? The duration was 10 weeks long, and each week athletes would turn in all of these questionnaires and they would review them, and then they would classify the injuries because they're trying to rule out traumatic injuries. So in this study, they were looking at overuse injuries only. So what are the results? What did they find? Well, the athletes fell into 3 distinct profiles, because remember, the goal of the study was trying to figure out the profiles of psychological profiles that are going to correlate with risk of injury. So you had 3 risk profiles. And what they found was risk profile number 2 was injured 74% of the time, whereas profile 3 and 1 were injured around 50% of the time. And risk profile 2 was significantly worse than the other profiles, right? So first and foremost, right off the bat, 75% of the time these athletes are hurting in some way or another. This is something you find time and time again in people that exercise and play sports, is that they're kind of all hurting at least a little bit, almost all time, right? Yeah, 3/4 of athletes over this 10-week period were having some sort of pain problem. And they could be very minor, but they were still dealing with something, right? So what kind of popped out about risk profile number 2? Well, it's kind of exactly what the authors thought they would find. So basically, in risk profile number 2, these folks were highly exposed to negative stressors, right? They were highly exposed to stressors in general. They're also high in perfectionist concerns. They were high in athletic identity, and they were low in coach/athlete relationships. Okay, so pretty much what they expected. All of these things have been shown in the past to correlate with an increased risk of injury, and they kind of found the same exact thing in this study, right? So what are the conclusions or clinical takeaways behind this study? Well, for one, I think that I am probably not the best person as a physical therapist to handle a lot of these issues, right? You need to have a qualified health professional that's really good at this to really be the best for that athlete, okay? So have a good network of people you can refer out to if this is something that's important for the individual that's in front of you. Right. That being said, I think that there are a lot of ways that a coach, athletic trainer, or a physical therapist can help these folks. And I think a lot of it kind of relies on first identifying folks that have these risks, right? And how can we do that? We can utilize some of these questionnaires. Like I said before, I don't use these questionnaires. Sometimes I get a good feel for the athlete just working for them, and I can see some of these things within the athlete based on the behaviors and the questions that I ask. But I think it's probably better to have some sort of questionnaire, or at least if you start to identify some of these, maybe you give them the questionnaire and then refer them out to someone who's qualified to help them with something like this. So, and this is a little bit of a spoiler because I'll probably do another fitness pain-free show on some of these studies. But if someone has a lot of negative life stress and you give them stress management strategies, not only does that reduce their stress, but also reduces their injury risk, which is pretty cool, right? If you identify folks that are high in perfectionistic concerns, this is challenging, right? And we talked about this already. If you are a bit of a perfectionist, right, and you're working harder than everyone else around you, that's one way to beat the competition. So I think part of it is just developing a really smart program which allows athletes to work extremely hard in a smart way. That way they're still outworking the people around them and they're being perfectionistic, but they're using it in a healthier way. So not beating their body up too much by doing the same thing over and over and over again. You're giving them different options. You're allowing them to express these needs in a better way, in a healthier way, right? So what else? How about those folks that have a high athletic identity, right? And this is actually a little challenging. And, it's funny because I definitely had this high athletic identity myself for a long period of time. And this is a double-edged sword, right? So having a high athletic identity is good fuel for the fire, right? If your perception of value to the world is how good you are as an athlete and how other people may perceive you, you're going to push really, really hard to be a good athlete, okay? So I'll use myself as an example. I kind of lost some of this athletic identity with my career, and I lost some of this athletic identity now as a father, right? And here's the thing. Once you have something else in your life that defines you, right, and you're proud of and you can work towards and you can be respected for, you lose some of that other identity. And as an athlete, if all you have is being an athlete, then you're going to push really hard for that, right? And if you take that away from someone, sometimes it makes them worse. At the end of the day, we're trying to make people healthy and work towards their goals, so I'm not trying to pass judgment anywhere, right? But here's the other thing. I think we need to educate these athletes, right? And just let them know that smart athletes don't push through pain, right? So if you think about it, as an athlete, all of the obstacles you face, you may kind of push past those obstacles with aggression and work ethic and just being a really strong person, individual that can work harder than the other people around you. And when you have an injury, oftentimes working through pain can make you worse. So for that athlete, that can really mess with their psychology. They're trying to utilize the same coping strategy they've used to get to a high level of success, but they just keep getting hurt over and over again. And right, that's tough. It's tough psychologically for athletes to deal with. But if they understand that when you have an injury, that's not something that you push through, and smart athletes actually modify things and change the way they train so they don't hurt themselves further, then all of a sudden that athletic identity is not going to hurt themselves further. They understand that, okay, I'm a very, very good athlete. Good athletes take injuries seriously. They listen to their body. They make better decisions, right? Now all of a sudden you're working with that person with a high athletic identity and you're allowing them to make better choices and still be an athlete, right? And the last one was people scoring low in coach/athlete relationship. And I think there's really a lot you probably can do for this one right here. Again, I'm probably not the best person to ask on how to change maybe your gym's culture or something along those lines. But I think the first and most important thing to do is open up communication, right? Letting your athletes know that you care. You're trying to create a culture of acceptance around an injury, right? And you're also trying to provide the education that like, hey, working through pain is dangerous. And chances are the best long-term strategy is not working through a bunch of pain, right? And in general, we tried to create this culture of acceptance back when I was a coach at CrossFit Verve at the start of every single person's experience at the gym. We'd ask about prior injuries and just let them know it's okay that you have these prior injuries. We need to make sure that we train in a smart way. If it ever hurts you, please tell one of the coaches. It's not good to work through pain. And then at the start of every single class, we'd ask everyone in the room, hey, is anyone dealing with any sort of pain problems or injuries? And are you guys concerned that you won't be able to do a specific movement? And do you need a modification? So I think a lot of it is really creating the culture that, hey, it's okay if you have pain. And please, please, please communicate if something's bothering you. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to keep you healthy, right? And if we're trying to chase performance, then getting hurt is a great way to get worse, right? So we don't want to do that either, okay? And that is it. Thank you very much, guys, for joining me. We have the citation right here, a psychological risk profile for overuse injuries in sport and exploratory study. Thank you very much to the authors. And thank you so much for supporting me. I am really being honest when I say folks like yourself allow me to truly pursue my passion in life. So thank you for that. If you are on YouTube, watching this video, please hit that thumbs up button. Please give me please subscribe and then leave a comment. I'd love to know your thoughts on these psychological risk profiles, maybe how you personally deal with this in your patients. If you're listening to this in the podcast version, please rate and review. Thank you very much. I'll see you guys soon.